In this video, let us try and understand the reason for using OpenAPI as well as Swagger in any of the application. So let us start it by creating an application, a Spring Boot application. So I'm just going to select Spring Starter project. Then the name of the project, what I'm going to give is project hyphen Swagger. Here Swagger as well, and I'm just leaving the rest of the stuff as it is. I'm using here Java 7, but if you want to use Java 8, you can use that. You can do that. Next, here I don't want to add any other dependencies other than just Spring Web. So let us search Spring Web, select, and just finish it. So you can see in here we have project Swagger application.java. This is the class where the Spring gets started, because you see the Spring Boot application annotation. Alright, I have created certain classes over here. I have not recorded the creation and updation of all these classes. What I have done is I have created a model called user detail. You can see over here user detail, which has three properties: the ID, the first name, and the last name. Also, I have created a constructor with all of these parameters so that these parameters or the properties can be set whenever an object for this user detail is created. And I have created a service class with annotation @component, and this service class has three different methods. One is the init method, wherein we are initializing a list of user detail, and get user details method returns the list that has been created in the init method, and add user details, which will add any new incoming user detail to the user detail list over here. And another class with name user controller, which is being annotated with REST controller, is being created, which uses user services within its mapping methods. So here I have three different mapping methods. One is a get mapping. For the root URL, it just shows a message of welcome, and a get mapping for the list of users. This API returns the list of users present in the application, and a post API for the users that creates or adds a new user into the user list. Here I'm not using any database connection because I'm planning to create a new video for that purpose. Let us just concentrate here on the functionalities without using the database. Now you see that we have a init method in the user services, and whenever a server or the application starts, what I'm doing over here is I'm getting the application context from this run, and then picking up the user services bean and initialize the user detail list, which is present in the services method. One thing to be noted over here is once I initialize the list, the data is retained into the application until the server is stopped or restarted. And whenever you restart the server, the user list will be reinitialized with these two users. a view of the pom.xml, as we have already added only the web dependency. Here you can see Spring Boot starter web dependency, and let us try and run this application. So here you can see in the logs, user services created has been printed in here, which has been added in the user services constructor method. And now that the server has been started, let us try and get the list of users. So for that purpose, we'll just go in here, localhost 8080, because the Tomcat has started on the port 8080. Here you can see there are two users in the application, and the first one with ID 1 and the second one with ID 2. Now, if I want to invoke a post request from this URL, that is not possible. So that could have been possible if there was an application or a page from the front end which invokes the API for the post request. So how can we invoke a post request here? For that purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Postman. Here you can see the Postman does the same thing. When I hit for the list of users, it gives me the list of users in here. And it also gives me the flexibility to create a new user. For this, the post request with this REST API, what I'm going to do is I'm creating a user with ID 4, first name as test4, last name as last4. So as you can see over here, a new user has been created in the list. Again, if you want to see in the list API, you can do that as well. Yeah. Now we have seen the problem of invoking post requests in the browser, and I have got a solution to use the Postman. But Postman has some other restrictions. Here you do not know whether some of the properties are mandatory or any validation conditions are there for any of the properties. And also, it would be very tedious for a developer to create the API request by himself. That, in my view, would be a bit unnecessary extra work that we are going to do over here. There could be another use case wherein a third-party application wants to use our REST API services, and we are giving the endpoints to them, but whenever they are developing, they need to know the kind of output they get for our GET request APIs and the kind of input they are going to provide us in the post request APIs or any other APIs. For that purpose, what can we do? We cannot just give the Postman APIs for them. First thing would be these are all locally created and tediously done. Another thing is this doesn't make sense because, as I have already told, there could be some of the properties which are mandatory or validation might not be known to them. So for this purpose, what we can do is we can use the Swagger UI through the OpenAPI definition. To incorporate Swagger UI as well as OpenAPI into the Spring Boot, we can use one of the dependencies that is available for free. So this is the one which we can use in here. Okay. The dependency called Spring Doc OpenAPI UI can be used for OpenAPI as well as the Swagger UI. Now that we have added a dependency to our application to use the OpenAPI, let us rerun the application. Localhost. Here you can see here in this Swagger UI, all the REST APIs which we have defined in our application, and also we can just trigger any of the REST API call from here. And just hitting the get request, you can see we have 2 entries. This is because we have restarted the application, and the post request as well. And you need not to worry about the structure and all that stuff. You will get it by default. Test 4, last 4. It has created and it is returning you the list. Again, if you go to the get request, you can see over here the added list. You can see in here, I'm just typing localhost 8080/swaggerui.html, and when I click on enter, it redirects me to the Swagger UI's index.html. And also, if I want to see the OpenAPI definition for these, what I have to do in here is localhost 8080/v3/API docs. Here you will find the API documentation of the same in OpenAPI version 3. So this API docs can be useful to provide API definitions to a third-party application who is using our APIs. So what we can do is we can just provide this OpenAPI. So what you can do in here is you can just add a postfix of YAML, and you will get a YAML file of this. Yeah, here you can see this is your YAML file. Or you can just copy this and provide a JSON file. So how does it look to a third-party application whenever they receive this OpenAPI doc? For that, what you can do is you can just head over to this editor.swagger.io in here and copy this. So this guide just accepts the YAML files or the YAML format, and if you provide the JSON format, it is just going to convert it into YAML. You can see here, these are the definitions which the third-party application developers can easily see. And there is one more new editor which they have. You can see in here, try our new editor. And this guy, your purpose, so you can see nothing is rendered. I am pasting in here. Again, you can see the API definitions. What if I want to give my own URL path or the path to the Swagger UI? So what I can do is I'll add a property in the applications.property spring doc dot swagger hyphen UI dot path equals what I'm going to let us give it as test hyphen swagger.html and restart the application. If I just type in swagger-ui.html, it doesn't work out, and instead close our API test hyphen swagger.html, and you can see over here. Similarly, if you want to give a different path for the OpenAPI docs, then you can add another property called spring doc dot API docs dot path. So for this, what I'm going to give is Swagger API and save. Restart the application. Localhost 8080 slash, what was our name? Swagger -API. There you go. If you use the older API, it says it's not found because we have overridden this API path. So now that we have changed the API doc path, there will be an implication on the Swagger UI. So if you see here, the Swagger UI's API path was v3 API docs. So now that we have changed it to Swagger API, what happens? Let us try and reload it. So it just failed to load remote configuration, because even though we have changed the API doc path, the browser has not refreshed its cache. So what do we need to do here is, there are two ways to check this out. What I'm going to do is, I'm just going to copy this Swagger API path and paste it in here, press enter. So you'll be able to see all the APIs which we have defined earlier in the application. Now if I reload this again, so the API path is gone. So what is happening in here? If you see closely in here, the Swagger initializer.js has the config URL of the previous path itself. So what we are going to do is, we are going to hard refresh the browser. So to do this, just press Ctrl on your keyboard and click on this refresh button, and there you go. So you have hard refreshed the browser and the Swagger API is loaded now. And also you can even see in the I think I need to reload it, Swagger initializer. So you can see here, now that we have hard refreshed the URL, so even if you just do a normal refresh, you will find the REST APIs reloaded by itself. What if you wanted to disable the Swagger UI HTML access itself? So for that, what I can do is, we have the property called spring doc dot swagger -UI dot enabled equals false. Let us try and check, run the application, test swagger.html. No, it is not accessible. If you just enable it again, restart, it's accessible. Do we also have a property to enable or disable the API docs path? Yes, we have, which is spring doc dot API docs dot enabled equals. Now it is true. If you see over here, localhost /v3 API docs, it is enabled. So what I'm going to do is, I'll just disable it, restart the application, and you're not able to access it. So here you can see what I have done is, API docs is not enabled, but the Swagger UI is enabled. So do you think we'll be able to access the Swagger UI? Let us see. Reload. No, we are not able to access the Swagger UI because API docs has more priority than the Swagger UIs. And also Swagger UI uses the API docs definition. So if you have disabled the API docs itself, then how can Swagger work? So for Swagger to work, the API docs should be enabled every time. True. And I did not restart the server. Okay. Yeah. Now you have the access to both of them. Is the other way true? What I mean is, if I disable the Swagger UI, will the API docs be accessible? Yes, they will be. API docs doesn't depend on Swagger UI. Let us see that as well. I have just disabled, restart. I'm able to access, but I'm not able to access the Swagger. So this covers the basics of Swagger UI as well as the OpenAPI that are being used in Spring Boot application. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.